In the summer of 2019, the Harper family left their home in Haven City for a quiet weekend in the mountains of northern Montana. They were supposed to return 2 days later, but they never did. When rescuers arrived, the fire was still warm, the ground still marked by tire tracks, yet every trace of the family had vanished. Years later, a wildfire drone would capture something that changed everything. How could a tent appear where no one could climb? And what had the mountain been hiding all along? It was August of 2019, the kind of late summer month when the mountains of Montana look calm from a distance, but breathe cold once the sun goes down. The cedar forests around Cedar Hollow were quiet that Friday afternoon, the roads nearly empty, the air so clean you could hear the river long before you saw it. That was when Daniel Harper locked the front door of his house in Haven City, checked his watch, and called out to his wife that they were leaving right on time, 4:15, exactly as planned. Daniel was 43, a civil engineer who liked order, routine, and things that could be measured. He was tall, neat, the kind of man who wrote down the mileage of every trip and taped the list to the dashboard just to be sure. He wasn't cold or distant, only careful. When he planned a weekend in the woods, he treated it like a small expedition. He checked the tire pressure twice, made sure the gas can was full, and left a note on the refrigerator that said simply, "Back Sunday, 6 p.m. Rachel, his wife, was 40, a third-grade teacher with a soft voice and a camera always hanging from her neck. Her students loved her because she had a way of making ordinary things sound important. A leaf, a shadow, a story. She kept a small Canon film camera she'd owned since college, and she planned to take pictures of the girls sitting by the river, the way her mother once had with her. Rachel wasn't a woman of big words, but her photographs always spoke gently, as if they remembered more than they showed. Their daughters, Sophie and Ellie, were 11 and 7. Sophie was curious and talkative, carrying a little cassette recorder everywhere. She liked to capture sounds, the hum of traffic, the bark of a dog, her parents' laughter. Ellie, younger, quieter, preferred to sit by her mother and draw. She wore a small silver locket with her name engraved on the back, a birthday gift from Rachel that she never took off. In the last photo ever taken of the family, Ellie is looking out the car window, one hand resting on that locket. The Harpers were heading to a campsite Daniel knew from years earlier, near Raven River on the edge of Cedar Hollow National Forest. It wasn't an official campground anymore, just a clearing that locals used when they wanted peace and distance. Daniel said the air there smelled like pine needles and stone. Rachel liked the idea of no phones, no noise, just a few quiet days before school started again. At 4:17 p.m., the security camera from a neighbor's porch caught their car pulling out of the driveway. Rachel waved, the girls sang along with a song on the radio, and Daniel, as always, kept his eyes on the road. It was a simple, happy moment, one that would later be replayed on every news channel in the state. They stopped once for gas at Raven Point, about an hour north. The receipt timestamp would later become one of the last verifiable traces of their movement. 5:03 p.m., paid in cash. After that, the trail goes dark. Daniel's phone sent a final signal at 7:02 p.m. near the south ridge of Raven River. Then, silence. No more calls, no more pings. It was as if the valley swallowed their connection whole. The weather turned quickly that night. Cold wind came down from the Black Ridge Mountains, followed by a sudden burst of rain. Search logs later showed that a park ranger noticed flashes of light near the eastern slope, around 8 o'clock, small and rhythmic like a flashlight. But he assumed it was another camper. The note stayed in his logbook for months before anyone realized its significance. By Sunday evening, the Harpers hadn't returned. Daniel's colleague tried calling several times, thinking they might be delayed. Rachel's sister in Spokane grew worried when her messages went unanswered. By Monday morning, both of their phones went straight to voicemail. At 10:30 a.m., local police filed the first missing person report. The initial search started modestly. A few officers, 2 search dogs, and a map marked with Daniel's camping permit. The team reached Cedar Hollow around noon and soon found the first sign of the Harpers: a ring of stones from a campfire, ashes still faintly warm, a discarded plastic spoon, and a scrap of blue nylon that looked like part of a tent. But there was no car, no tent, and no footprints leading away. Heavy rain the night before had washed the ground clean. For the next 3 days, helicopters circled the valley, thermal cameras scanned the forest, and divers checked the deeper pools of the river. They found nothing. The Subaru was gone. The trail ended in air. One rescuer later said it was like chasing a shadow that kept moving whenever you turned your head. If they'd wandered off, he said, we would have found at least one clue, a shoe, a jacket, anything. But there was nothing. Theories came fast, as they always do. Some thought the Harpers had been caught in a flash flood and swept into the river. Others believed Daniel had driven off a service road and down one of the ravines that cut through the valley. But the road showed no broken guardrails, no skid marks, and the weather that weekend, though rough, wasn't enough to explain a disappearance so complete. By the end of August, the official search was scaled back. Volunteers kept looking for another month. When autumn came and the trees began to turn, the signs of the Harpers faded with the leaves. The case file grew thicker but emptier. Pages of interviews, weather charts, and nothing that resembled an answer. On December 12, 2019, the file was marked inactive. The words used were bureaucratic, almost cold. Unresolved disappearance, likely environmental factors. But the local sheriff who signed it added a quiet note at the bottom of the page. In his cursive handwriting, he wrote, "Feels planned, no sign of panic, no reason to leave, but they did." That sentence would be read again 6 years later, when a wildfire drone, scanning the upper cliffs of Black Ridge, found a single blue tent still standing. It looked untouched by time, half-zipped, with nothing inside but sleeping bags and a children's book stiff with moisture. It was the same model Daniel Harper had bought on sale a week before the trip. The same color Rachel had written on the packing list. The same tear in the corner seam she had sewn by hand. But back in 2019, none of that was known yet. Back then, there was only the forest, the river, and the quiet absence of a family that had planned for everything except vanishing. The mountains closed over their trail like water sealing after a stone. In the final entry of the initial case file, typed by an officer who never met them, the record ends with one simple line. Departed home at 4:15 p.m., did not return. From that moment on, no one ever saw the Harper family again. When a family disappears in a national forest, time becomes the first enemy. For every hour that passes, scent fades, memory blurs, and weather erases what people might have left behind. In the Harper case, that window closed almost as soon as it opened. The search began on the morning of August 13, 2019, 2 days after the Harpers were due home. Sheriff Dean Mullen of Flathead County called in a standard missing campers response. He'd handled dozens before. Hikers gone off trail, fishermen overdue by a night or two. They usually turned up cold and embarrassed, walking out of the woods with apologies. This time felt different. The Harpers were known to be careful, and Daniel, the father, kept meticulous notes about their trips. That was the first red flag. People that precise rarely vanished by accident. By noon, a rescue team was in place. 10 volunteers, 2 bloodhounds, and a helicopter from the state's Department of Emergency Services. Their first stop was the site marked on Daniel's camping permit, an area near the Raven River crossing. The team expected to find the car, or at least tire tracks. Instead, they found a circle of stones where a campfire had been and little else. The ashes were still warm enough to smear black on a glove. Nearby lay a few scraps: a plastic spoon, a torn food wrapper, and a strip of blue nylon roughly 3 inches wide. To the untrained eye, it meant nothing. But to the investigators, it hinted at a tent being taken down, or torn down, in a hurry. Yet there were no footprints leading away, no sign of dragging or struggle. It was as if the family had simply stepped into thin air. The following day, the search expanded. The Sheriff's Department called in the Montana Bureau of Investigation, MBI, for technical support, including mapping drones and thermal imaging. Weather had turned foul: steady rain, strong wind, temperatures dipping into the 40s. The rain washed away what little trace might have been left. "We were working against a clock that had already stopped," one rescue worker said later. Helicopters combed the ridges, scanning for the heat signatures of campfires or car metal. None appeared. Divers searched sections of the Raven River and nearby ponds. Nothing. The Subaru was gone. The camp gear was gone. Even the family's cooler and folding chairs were gone. By August 15th, local news stations had picked up the story. Family of 4 missing in Montana wilderness. Reporters arrived, and the quiet town of Haven City became a base for speculation. A few journalists suggested the Harpers might have staged their disappearance, a theory fueled by a rumor that Daniel had recently taken out an insurance policy. The company later confirmed it was standard coverage through his employer, not evidence of anything sinister. Rachel's sister, Emily, stood outside the sheriff's office, pleading for patience. "They're not the kind of people who run away," she told reporters. "Danny doesn't do things halfway. If he left, there'd be a reason, and he'd tell someone." Her voice trembled but never cracked. The FBI entered the case officially on August 18th, citing potential interstate involvement, though privately, agents admitted they were there mostly for resources. They analyzed Daniel's phone data and found the final ping. August 9th, 7:02 p.m., near a service road south of the river. After that, both phones went dark within 10 minutes of each other. A nearby cell tower recorded a faint signal the next morning, unconfirmed, possibly a glitch. The GPS from the family's car navigation system offered no help. Its last route stopped exactly where Daniel's permit said they'd planned to camp. The dogs, brought in from Helena, picked up a trace along a trail that climbed toward the lower slopes of Black Ridge Mountain. The scent line continued for nearly half a mile, then abruptly ended on open ground. No other human scent crossed it. Handlers described it as if the trail just cut off. The dogs circled, confused, then lay down. Rain fell harder that afternoon, and by the next morning the trail was gone. The community of Haven City turned the search into a mission. Over 50 volunteers, neighbors, co-workers, teachers joined in. They formed human chains across the clearings and riverbanks. They left bright orange ribbons to mark the areas they'd already covered. They found nothing. 2 weeks later, the case reached its first dead end. A report came in from a hiker who claimed to have seen a silver SUV parked near the quarry road on August 10th. Investigators rushed to the site but found no tire impressions. The quarry's watchman said he hadn't seen any car since the spring. Still, the lead made it into the file. At the end of the month, MBI issued a formal statement. No evidence of foul play or voluntary disappearance. Investigation continues. Behind closed doors, that sentence meant they had nothing to hold on to. By early September, search teams were reduced to a few officers who walked the area weekly, more out of duty than hope. The case turned cold faster than anyone expected. Winter arrived early in Montana that year. Snow covered the trails and sealed the forest like a lid. The blue tents of the rescue camps disappeared, leaving only footprints that filled with frost. The mountain, once alive with voices and radio chatter, grew silent again. But even then, small details kept the case alive in whispers. A logger reported hearing a low mechanical hum near the ridge. Steady, rhythmic, not wind. Geologists later dismissed it as vibration from old survey pipes buried decades earlier. Still, the note went into the file. A hunter claimed he saw lights deep in the forest one night in October, moving in a slow line as if descending. That, too, was written down and later forgotten. By December, the Harpers' home was empty. The furniture was sold, their photographs boxed up by relatives. The neighborhood kept the porch light on through Christmas in silent tribute. For Sheriff Mullen, it was the case that refused to settle. He told a reporter years later, "You get used to tragedy out here. People drown, people freeze, cars slide off the road. But this one, there was no how. It's the only case where I can't say what happened, only when it stopped." In January 2020, the file was transferred to the state's Cold Case Division in Helena. It joined a row of manila folders marked Missing, Open. Inside the Harper folder were 212 pages, maps, photos, phone records, and a note from the last debriefing that read, "No recovery, no leads, no evidence of departure." 6 years would pass before anyone opened it again. When they did, the first page anyone saw was that same note, followed by a single photograph stapled to the back. Daniel Harper's camping checklist. The paper was creased but legible. At the top, he had written, "Don't forget to look up once in a while." It was a line meant for his daughters. In time, it would come to mean something else entirely. By the spring of 2020, the Harper disappearance had faded from front pages and talk shows. In the small town of Haven City, it was spoken of quietly, like a wound people had learned not to touch. The sheriff's office moved on to other cases. New files replaced the old. But in the basement archive of the county courthouse, the Harper folder remained. It sat on the second shelf from the bottom, labeled in black ink, "Harper Family. Open, inactive." For Rachel's sister, Emily. Sanders. That label was unbearable. Every few weeks, she called the sheriff's desk asking if there was anything at all. Most times, she received the same answer. No new leads, no new reports. When the COVID pandemic hit later that year, search efforts across the state were suspended. Trails were closed, park rangers reassigned, and the Harper file, like so many others, was left to gather dust. Emily refused to let it die. In early 2021, she created an online group called Finding the Harpers. It started with a few friends and volunteers, mostly from Montana and Washington state. Within months, hundreds had joined. They shared old photos, theories, and memories of Daniel's methodical nature, Rachel's kindness, and the children's laughter. Some even drove into Cedar Hollow on weekends to look again, despite the steep terrain and warnings from rangers. They found nothing, but the act of searching gave them comfort. A way to keep the family real, not just a story. Meanwhile, the case drew occasional attention from journalists who specialized in missing person stories. A few national outlets ran features with titles like "The Family Who Vanished Without a Trace" or "4 Voices Lost in the Woods." For a brief moment, the story flared up again. Talk shows debated whether the Harpers had fallen victim to an accident, a crime, or something stranger. But without new evidence, the discussion always ended in the same silence. Inside the Montana Bureau of Investigation, the file eventually landed on the desk of Detective Maren Doyle. She was in her mid-40s then, a veteran of mountain rescues and cold case reviews. Colleagues said she had the patience of a medic and the stubbornness of a climber. Doyle had worked 2 decades in search operations. She'd seen how time changes a case, not just erasing details, but reshaping them. When she read the Harper file, she sensed what others had missed. "They didn't vanish," she said later. "They were removed." Doyle started with the basics. She reviewed every item logged as evidence: the campfire stones, the torn nylon, the map, and Daniel's checklist. None revealed anything new. Then she examined the photographs taken during the 2019 search. Most were routine images of trees and slopes, but one caught her eye. In the corner of a frame showing the ridge above the Raven River, there was a faint geometric outline, too regular to be natural. When she enhanced the image, it resembled a metal pipe protruding from rock. The detail had gone unnoticed in 2019. Curious, Doyle pulled public land survey records for that area. What she found was stranger still. According to state archives, the section of forest where the pipe appeared had once been part of an environmental study in the early 1970s. The project, labeled Federal Survey 734, was supposedly decommissioned decades ago. The map listed several access points to underground monitoring chambers used for vibration testing during logging operations. All were marked sealed. It wasn't proof of anything, but it was enough to stir her instincts. She began writing letters to agencies, asking for access to records that no one had touched in 40 years. Most replies were polite refusals: documents lost, files not digitized, projects classified. The pattern felt deliberate. Around that time, Doyle visited the Harpers' former home. It had new owners now, a retired couple who knew little of the story. But in the garage, still nailed to the wall, she found an old pegboard with outlines of tools Daniel once hung there. Each tool had a label: hammer, rope, tent stake. Only one outline was unlabeled, a small rectangular shape roughly the size of a camera. In her report, Doyle wrote, "Possible missing item: personal camera, Canon film or digital model, not recovered at site." She noted it quietly, without realizing that years later, that single missing object would reopen everything. Throughout 2022 and 2023, the case drifted in and out of attention. Online forums buzzed with theories. Some believed Daniel had discovered illegal logging operations and been silenced. Others whispered about government experiments, secret tunnels, even alien abduction. Doyle ignored the noise. "Conspiracy is just imagination without discipline," she said once. "What matters is the evidence we can touch." Still, she couldn't ignore one strange consistency. Several hikers, over the years, had reported hearing a low hum near the eastern cliffs of Black Ridge Mountain, the same area where the Harpers Trail had ended. The sound wasn't constant. It came and went, like machinery turning on and off beneath the ground. Park rangers dismissed it as wind through cracks in the rock. Doyle wasn't so sure. In 2024, after nearly 5 years of silence, she managed to have the case officially reopened under a new classification: potential homicide, suspicious circumstances. It was a technical move, but it gave her authority to re-examine evidence and request new surveys of the terrain. She brought in a young field technician from the state university, a geologist named Isaac Lang, to help interpret subsurface readings. They began running limited ground-penetrating radar scans along the lower slopes of Black Ridge. Most showed solid rock. But one scan, near the area of that strange pipe, displayed an anomaly: a hollow void beneath the surface, irregular but large. Doyle filed a request for deeper imaging. Bureaucracy delayed the process for months. Funding was cut twice. The paperwork vanished once in transit. Yet she persisted. By late 2024, her notes filled a separate binder. On the last page, she wrote a single line. "If the mountain hides something, it will return it on its own time." No one could have known how soon that would happen. The following September, a wildfire broke out west of Cedar Hollow. It burned fast but stayed mostly in the upper ridges. Part of the containment effort, a private contractor was hired to map the burn zones with drones. One of those pilots was named Travis Quinn. On his third flight, he noticed something glinting on a narrow ledge, a flash of blue that didn't belong among the charred trees. He zoomed in, took a frame, and saved it. 3 days later, the image landed on Doyle's desk. It showed a tent, blue nylon, intact, standing alone on a cliff 2,000 feet above the valley floor. And for the first time in 6 years, the case file of the Harper family was no longer cold. It was burning again. The morning the image arrived, Detective Maren Doyle sat alone in her office at the Montana Bureau of Investigation. She had been reviewing old search maps when a young technician from the forestry department handed her a printed photograph. "This came from a fire survey drone," he said. "You might want to see it." At first glance, it looked ordinary. A gray rock face, streaked with soot and shadow. Then Doyle noticed the glimmer of blue in the middle distance. The object was small but perfectly shaped. A dome tent, the kind sold at outdoor stores across the country. Its surface caught the sunlight just enough to show that the material wasn't burned or torn. It looked new, almost untouched. The technician pointed to the coordinates printed at the bottom corner. "That's on the eastern ridge of Black Ridge Mountain. Elevation's about 2,000 feet. No trails up there, no recorded campsites." Doyle didn't speak for a long moment. The model of the tent looked familiar, painfully so. She reached for the Harper file, pulled the inventory list, and traced her finger down to item number 12. Tent, REI Half Dome, blue, purchased July 2019. Her pulse quickened, not from excitement but disbelief. After 6 years, could something that fragile have survived storms, snow, and fire, and still look like that? 3 days later, a team of 6 climbers and 2 investigators set out for the ridge. The ascent took nearly 6 hours through loose shale and thin air. The site could not be reached by vehicle. Even helicopters risked downdraft collapse. They moved carefully, inch by inch, until they reached the ledge. The tent was there. It stood at a slight tilt, anchored by 3 aluminum stakes and a cluster of small rocks. One stake was missing, yet the tent hadn't collapsed. A fine layer of dust covered it, but the color, deep ocean blue, had not faded. The zipper was halfway open, the fabric edges stiff from wind. Inside, they found 4 sleeping bags laid out in perfect order. 2 adult-sized, 2 smaller. Between them sat an enamel mug, cracked but upright, a lantern whose batteries had long corroded, and a paperback children's book, Charlotte's Web, its pages warped with moisture. It was, unmistakably, the Harper's tent. But something felt wrong. Everything inside looked precisely arranged, as though someone had set each item down with deliberate care. There were no signs of panic, no torn seams, no scattered belongings. Even the ground beneath the tent showed no impressions from feet or knees. It was as if no one had ever entered. Doyle instructed the team to photograph and catalog every detail before touching anything. When they lifted one of the sleeping bags, a small black object rolled free and clattered onto the stone. It was a camera battery, Canon brand, model from 2018. On its display, the charge indicator still read 42%. That detail would later become the heart of the mystery. Batteries do not hold power for 6 years in freezing temperatures. Yet this one had. The team packed the items carefully into evidence bags and hiked out before nightfall. A second group returned 2 days later to examine the area around the ledge. They found no footprints, no rope marks, no sign of descent or ascent. From the valley below, the ledge was invisible unless viewed from above. For weeks afterward, the story dominated state news. The Harper tent found. Unexplainable discovery on Black Ridge Cliff. National outlets followed. Television crews came to Haven City. The old video of the Harpers leaving their driveway aired again and again. Commentators speculated wildly. Had the tent been airdropped? Had it been part of a rescue exercise? Or, most disturbing of all, had someone moved it there long after the family vanished? Doyle ignored the noise. She worked quietly with forensic analysts at the state lab. They cleaned the battery, confirmed its serial number matched one purchased with the Harper's camera in 2019, and then attached it to a compatible Canon body. The screen flickered, loaded, and displayed 2 folders labeled Trail OG 2019 and Camp OG 2019. The first folder contained ordinary photographs: Rachel lighting a small stove, Daniel hammering a tent stake, the girls kneeling beside a creek. Smiling faces, perfect light, the kind of moments meant for a scrapbook. But after photo 47, the tone changed. The shots became hurried, off-center. Trees blurred past as if the photographer were walking uphill quickly. Then, at image 63, the pictures stopped making sense. Tilted sky, dark shapes, a flash of light, and then black. 2 frames later, a figure appeared at the edge of the tent. Tall, broad-shouldered, half hidden behind the fabric. Too large to be Daniel, too tall to be Rachel. The next frame was blank. Analysts examined the metadata embedded in the images. Every photo carried GPS coordinates consistent with the family's original campsite, until the final 3. Those last coordinates placed the camera 30 miles east, exactly on the cliff where the tent had been found. But the timestamp was impossible. August 9, 2019, 6:43 p.m. The same minute Daniel's phone was still pinging from their base camp near Raven River. 2 devices, 2 locations, the same moment. Doyle stared at the data until her eyes blurred. Either the records are wrong, she told the technicians, or we're missing an entire chapter of what happened out there. When the photos became public, they reignited every theory imaginable. Online forums filled with speculation, time displacement, staged evidence, parallel investigations. A few suggested that the tent had been part of an old search exercise and only coincidentally matched the Harpers. But the small tear in the corner seam, the one Rachel had sewn by hand, was identical. There was no coincidence. A week after the tent was recovered, a second team rappelled down the slope beneath the ledge to search for anything that might have fallen. Among loose stones, they found a small triangular pile of rocks, clearly arranged by hand. Inside it lay a silver locket, tarnished but intact. The engraving on the back read one word: Ellie. DNA confirmed it belonged to the youngest Harper child. The discovery hit Doyle harder than she expected. She'd seen grief before, but not like this. Grief trapped in time, preserved as cleanly as the objects themselves. In her case notes, she wrote, "Items indicate deliberate placement. No environmental explanation for preservation or position. Tent possibly moved post-event by unknown party." She stopped short of writing by whom or why. Back in Haven City, news of the find drew crowds. Candles appeared outside the Harpers' old house. People spoke of closure, but Doyle knew better. A mystery does not close when an object is found. It opens further. Then came the final twist. While reviewing manufacturing records from REI, the outdoor company, analysts noticed something strange. The rainfly attached to the tent, the waterproof cover, bore a production stamp dated April 2021, 2 years after the Harpers vanished. No such replacement part had been sold under their name. Someone, at some point, had replaced a section of the tent. When Doyle read the report, she underlined a sentence 3 times. Fabric not contemporary with 2019 model. It meant that whoever had handled the tent had access to it long after the disappearance. She closed her notebook, sat back, and whispered to herself, "Then where have they been?" Outside, night had fallen over Helena. The wind blew steady from the north, carrying the faint hum of something electrical in the distance. For a fleeting second, it sounded almost like breath, steady, rhythmic, as if the mountain itself were still alive and waiting. By the end of 2022, the Harper investigation had turned from search and rescue to structural forensics. Detective Maren Doyle still carried the worn folder that had followed her through 3 agencies and 2 winters. The blue tent, now sealed in a climate-controlled evidence vault, was proof that something physical had been placed on the cliff long after the family disappeared. What remained unknown was how and why. When the recovery team described hearing a vibration through the stone, Doyle didn't dismiss it. Reports from rangers over the years mentioned the same thing: a low mechanical hum that came and went near the eastern ridge of Black Ridge Mountain. It was easy to ignore such stories until the evidence suggested they might be linked. In October 2022, Doyle hiked back to the ledge with a field engineer from the state's environmental office. They brought along a stethoscope-style sensor used to detect subsurface leaks in pipelines. At first, the headphones carried only static and wind. Then, gradually, a pulse emerged. Steady, rhythmic, and too even to be natural. The recording lasted 8 minutes. Back at the lab, the sound registered at 43.8 hertz, a range common to rotating machinery. Yet there were no known mines, pumps, or power stations within 20 miles. The Bureau's environmental division could find nothing to match the vibration pattern. Doyle turned to the archives. Old forestry maps from the early 1970s referenced a Federal Survey 734, an environmental monitoring project built into the same ridge. According to its termination report, the underground chambers had been sealed in 1974 and all equipment removed. The document included a simple sketch: 4 small test shafts and 1 larger maintenance tunnel, each capped with concrete. None were visible today. With limited funding, Doyle convinced the Bureau to allow a non-intrusive, ground-penetrating radar scan. A young geologist, Dr. Isaac Lang, assisted. Their readings confirmed multiple hollow spaces beneath the cliff, irregular shapes about 40 to 60 meters below, connected by narrow shafts. In the largest cavity, the signal bounced off metallic surfaces, possibly old framing or equipment. 2 weeks later, a second pass revealed something even stranger: 3 dense objects resting on the floor of that chamber. The shapes roughly matched human dimensions, but the next scan, taken 48 hours later, showed nothing. Lang blamed data interference. Doyle made no comment. The Bureau halted further scans, citing safety and cost. But Doyle and Lang continued quietly with handheld sensors. They located an old ventilation pipe protruding from the ridge, rusted but intact. When Doyle lowered a microphone down the shaft, the hum grew louder, pulsing every few seconds. Then, at the 4-minute mark, there came a single metallic knock. The lab later called it acoustic artifact, a harmless echo. Doyle wrote one additional note in her logbook: timing too deliberate. Through November and December, the vibration followed a pattern, active from midnight to dawn, silent by morning. Temperature readings near the vent were 4 degrees warmer than the surrounding rock. The data pointed to machinery still operating somewhere below, though no power lines fed the ridge. Federal permission to drill was denied in early 2023. The area, once part of a long-expired government lease, now sat in a bureaucratic gray zone. No agency wanted responsibility for what might be under there. On February 3rd, the hum ceased entirely. Doyle returned to the site 2 days later. The ground was still warm to the touch. She took one final audio recording. Nothing but wind and the crunch of snow under her boots. In her last field report that season, she summarized the case in 8 lines. Acoustic source unidentified. Possible residual equipment from 1970s survey. No visual access. Terrain unstable. Recommend closure pending structural study and federal review. Status of missing persons. Unresolved. When the Bureau reclassified the Harper file that spring, it shifted from active investigation to archival anomaly. Yet Doyle kept her own copy. At the bottom of her personal notebook, she added a short, private observation. If the Harpers found an open shaft in 2019, they could have entered a chamber no one remembered existed. Whatever powered that chamber was still running. Someone, sometime, shut it off. That line never appeared in the official record. Even now, hikers who pass the ridge on calm days say they can feel a faint tremor beneath the rock. Steady, measured, almost mechanical. Whether it's a buried generator, trapped air, or memory caught in stone, no one can prove. The mountain gives no answers. And somewhere in the evidence vault in Helena, the blue tent remains folded in its case, clean as the day it was found, waiting, as if time itself had chosen not to touch it. The Harper file had grown thick with data, but thin on answers. The public had lost interest, but inside Montana's Bureau of Investigation, the case still hovered in quiet limbo, too strange to dismiss, too incomplete to solve. There were no suspects, no confirmed crime, only facts that refused to align. Experts offered theories. Geologists said the hum beneath Blackridge was resonant airflow, created when wind passed through old survey vents sealed decades ago. Engineers argued it could be an abandoned generator, perhaps reactivated by a rock slide or by heat expansion after the wildfires. Others suspected deliberate interference, someone maintaining the old structure for reasons unknown. None of it could be proven. The Harper family's relatives chose restraint over speculation. Rachel's sister, Emily, spoke briefly to local press. "We're not chasing ghosts," she said. "We just want to know if they suffered, and if anyone's still accountable for leaving those tunnels open." Her quiet persistence helped push through a small state inquiry into unregistered underground sites, but the committee closed within months, citing lack of jurisdiction and funds. Doyle retired in the spring of 2024. She didn't hold a press conference or write a book. She simply filed her last report, left her badge on the desk, and drove north to a cabin overlooking the same mountains that had consumed her career. Those who visited said she kept 3 objects on her table: the Canon battery still reading 42%, a printed spectrogram of the high 43.8 Hz hum, and a photograph of the tent before it was touched. When a journalist from the Helena Daily asked if she believed the Harpers were alive when they reached the ridge, she hesitated. "I believe they found something built and forgotten," she said finally. "Whatever it wasn't meant to be rediscovered." In the years that followed, their story became part of local folklore. Hikers spoke of a faint vibration under the cliffs on cold mornings. Rangers dismissed it as temperature shift in the rock, but people kept listening anyway. A few schools in Haven City added the case to criminal justice courses as an example of persistence without closure, proof that truth can be documented yet remain untouchable. The Harper home was sold again, its garden replanted. The blue tent, the locket, and the recorder sit in sealed evidence storage, awaiting a court order that will probably never come. The mountain stands unchanged. The final entry in the file bears Doyle's handwriting. It reads, "Mechanical source unconfirmed. Human origin possible. recommend preservation of evidence until power readings reach 0. That note, simple and clinical, closes one of Montana's most haunting, unsolved cases. The hum has not been heard since. But on still nights, when the wind drops, some swear the ground beneath Blackridge seems to breathe. Quiet, steady, as if remembering the family that once disappeared into its depths. Time softens most stories. It blurs the edges of what was once urgent and loud until all that's left are the quieter details. The photographs, the paperwork, and the people who still look for meaning in both. The disappearance of the Harper family is no longer a headline, but in Haven City, their name has never quite left the air. Every August, near the anniversary of the trip, candles appear on the courthouse steps. Some are placed by former students of Rachel Harper, now adults with children of their own. Others come from strangers who only know the case through news reruns and podcasts. A few of Daniel's old co-workers still attend. They say little, standing shoulder to shoulder until the last candle burns out. Rachel's sister, Emily Sanders, remains the family's most visible voice. After years of unanswered letters, she has grown measured in the way she speaks about the case. Her foundation, Listen Beneath, still funds small rescue operations and awareness campaigns for people lost in wilderness areas. The name came from one of Daniel's old notes to his daughters, scribbled on the back of a grocery list. When you're out there, listen beneath the noise. That's how you find what matters. In interviews, Emily rarely talks about the investigation. She talks about the family instead. Daniel's methodical way of packing the car, Rachel's habit of humming while she cooked, the girls leaving handprints on fogged windows after every road trip. They were ordinary, she says softly. That's what people forget. They were just trying to live a quiet life. Detective Maren Doyle lives quietly herself now. Her cabin sits at the edge of Flat Creek, where the pines grow thick and the air carries the same chill as the Blackridge Ridge she once studied. She tends a small garden and walks at dawn with a thermos of coffee, often stopping to watch the fog drift between the trees. Her neighbors say she still keeps files spread across her kitchen table. Maps, notes, and spectrogram prints, but she no longer talks about the case unless asked directly. One visitor, a local reporter, described her as the kind of woman who listens longer than she speaks. During their conversation, Doyle shared a thought she had never written down. You can close a file, but you can't close a question. Some things stay open because they're supposed to remind us we haven't learned enough yet. The Listen Beneath Foundation occasionally receives small donations from retired law enforcement officers who once searched the Harper site. One anonymous contributor sends the same note each year. For the ones who wait. Emily believes it's Doyle, though she never asks. In 2024, a portion of the Cedar Hollow National Forest was renamed the Harper Ridge Preserve. It was a quiet decision, voted through without ceremony. A plaque near the trailhead bears 4 names and a short inscription chosen by Rachel's former students. They went to find stillness. May we find theirs. The hum that once defined the investigation has not been recorded again. Scientists call it coincidence. Locals prefer to think of it as the mountain finally settling. But some hikers, on certain still mornings, say they can feel a faint vibration under the soles of their boots, a tremor too steady to be wind, too quiet to be machinery. They stop and listen. And for a moment, the forest seems to hold its breath. A few yards from where the Harpers' driveway once stood, the new owners of the house planted a maple tree. Its roots have cracked the edge of the sidewalk. Children play under it after school, unaware of who lived there before. Sometimes, when the light fades, Emily drives by and parks across the street. She doesn't get out of the car. She just sits, watching the shadows grow, then turns the engine off and listens to the evening sounds. The same way her sister once did when the girls were small. In the end, what remains of the Harper story isn't fear or speculation. It's persistence. It's the quiet certainty that someone, somewhere, still keeps the record open. The blue tent, carefully folded, rests in a locked crate at the State Archive. The Canon battery still shows 42%. The sound files, labeled only by date, occupy a small drawer in a lab that no longer studies them. And yet, every few months, an intern plays one just to hear it for themselves. What they describe afterward is always the same. A faint vibration, like air moving through stone. Maybe it's the hum of a buried generator. Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe, as Doyle once said, it's what's left when a story refuses to fade completely. On the last page of her private notebook, now in the possession of the Bureau's cold case archive, there's a single handwritten line. They are not lost in the mountain. They are part of it. That sentence isn't proof, but perhaps it doesn't need to be. In a world where most mysteries are reduced to files and timelines, the Harper case endures because it asks something simpler than how or why. It asks whether silence can hold a memory, and whether listening, truly listening, can still bring someone home. And as long as people stop at the edge of the forest and lean close to the earth, that question will never completely go unanswered. If this story moved you, don't let it fade like so many unsolved cases do. Subscribe to the channel. Every new follower helps keep these real investigations, these untold stories, alive in memory. Leave a comment with your thoughts or theories about what happened on Harper Ridge. Was it an accident, a cover-up, or something still hidden beneath the mountain? Like, share, and stay tuned for the next case. Tell us where you watch from,